At the other end of the spectrum from horror, let's talk about comedy.
When I was researching and doing all the stuff on horror, comedy kept coming up. Being afraid and laughing are two of the most uncontrollable responses. If you find something funny, you laugh. It's a reflex, and you jump at a fright as a reflex. And so artistically, structurally, how to get a jump scare and a laugh, there's a lot of overlap there.
This is Life and Faith, the podcast where we seek to be good company, inviting you to a table of gathered friends, experiences and ideas, and where what's served up might not always agree with you, where you might hear an opinion you wouldn't normally embrace for yourself, but we think it's good to share a table with those with whom we mightn't always agree, because, well, we're all human after all, trying to make sense of our lives, the world, and all things life and faith. Welcome to Life and Faith from CPX. I'm Simon Smart. Have you been to the movies lately? Or are you more likely to be streaming your favourite show at home? Well, film and television have formed a really central role in the lives of many of us over the last century, and they continue to evolve and play their part. Today we are thinking about human imagination and storytelling. We are storytelling beings, aren't we? My guest today is an expert in the genre of movies and television. Dr. Kutter Callaway is a writer and speaker focusing on the interaction between theology and culture, particularly film, television and online media. He holds 2 PhDs, one in theology and the second in psychosocial science. And both of these areas inform his fascination with film and TV. He's from the US and he visited Australia with Real Dialogue. They put on events discussing the links between film and faith. This is a great conversation about what grabs large audiences in film and television, the place of comedy and redemptive arcs, and even what horror films can tell us about ourselves. Kutter Callaway, great to have you here in Australia. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me out all the way across the ocean.
Good to have you here. Now, I want to talk to you about the significance of story for being human and the way that imagination plays such a rich part of the human experience. It is key, isn't it, to being a human being?
Yeah, we are storied creatures to the point that our very identity, like who Kutter is, isn't really identifiable outside of the story that I've been thrown into, right? Yeah. And so the history of my life really is what makes me me, and not just some creature or organism experiencing a bunch of random chaotic events in life. I come to know myself and others and the world around me by putting those discrete events into a narrative that has a beginning, a middle, an end, that I assume has some sort of purpose or direction or meaning. And in fact, most of my life, and I think any of our lives, is trying to figure that out. How do all those discrete events connect to each other? And how am I going to make sense of the various things that I encounter? So yeah, on a very basic level, it would be hard to know ourselves or anything else if it weren't for our capacity to put those things into some kind of a story.
Yeah, so we have our own story. So there's sort of a narrative arc to our story. Also, and this is what you're sort of alluding to, situating ourselves within a bigger story seems to be important, and maybe something that we've lost a little bit in the West particularly.
Yeah, if you talk to any of the sort of theorists on Western society, and especially post-Enlightenment, there was this kind of assumption that with the rise of science and really technology, that would replace what we would call a kind of metaphysic, right? A need to have anything more than the stuff we can see and taste and touch. And in some cases that has happened. Like we see AI now, right, is like the apotheosis of this mentality where somehow machines, like actual computers, are going to replace all of this. And we're going, well, wait a minute, how is that human? Or is that human? And so I think what we're experiencing now, all these societies that were very industrialized, very science-driven, very technologically driven, the people in those societies now are going, wait, something's missing. That doesn't actually fulfill this sort of implicit longing that I've got in my heart, well, where do I go pursue that? And I think that's where we're seeing now a rise of all sorts of different, you could call them like meaning-making projects. Sometimes we would call it like a spirituality. And people are pursuing that, I think, for that, I want to be a part of a larger story. Life isn't reducible to just what money I can make before I die.
Yeah.
My project has to be, right? Has to be part of something bigger. And if not, it seems really deeply unsatisfying. And I think that's part of the modern dissatisfaction or ennui or whatever word you want to say, is that like we're past the sort of postmodern extreme where we're going, it didn't deliver on what we thought it would. So where do we find that meaning and where do we find that larger story?
A related question is, are we in danger of losing the centrality of story and imagination given how much technology does the work for us? I sometimes look with some degree of concern, let's say, when I see these tiny little kids with iPads and it's sort of like doing the imaginative work for them, I think. Do you have any feelings about this?
Oh, yeah, lots of feelings on that. Partly because I have kids. I have 3 daughters. They're 15, 13, and 10. And I say I've been thankful that they're slightly younger. So I have colleagues and friends who have just a little bit older children. And when they were being raised, there wasn't as much awareness of how technology was affecting kids in particular. And so they just all have all the things, right? And now they're going, as parents, like, oh no, we can't put the genie back in the bottle. And so I've tended to be a little bit more skeptical or cautious or maybe almost a Luddite when it comes to my kids and that. I just saw the trailer for the new Toy Story 5. I don't know if you've seen this. And it looks like that's the question. So you have all these toys and their existential crisis for the toys is the young girl that they're supposed to befriend gets this, it looks like essentially an iPad. And it knows everything and does everything.
Doesn't want to play with them anymore.
Exactly. And so I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm imagining that is a story kind of exploring the now parents or older people looking back going like, oh no, what's happening to kids here? Now, I don't want to say it's all bad because there are some things where it actually, some of these things enable us to tell stories better or more efficiently. But I do think the more that technology separates any of those things from human bodies, that's a problem or it becomes problematic. And what I mean by bodies is sometimes literally bodies in the room, like human writers getting together and imagining things. Once that gets detached and the AI or the tech is doing all that for us, it becomes quote unquote, for the listener, I'm putting air quotes here, more efficient. But actually, one of the things about human imagination is that it's not efficient. A lot of creativity happens in the mistakes you make and that you learn and that you feel in your body. And so you get whatever the artist is. Let's say it's a dancer would maybe be the best thing. The way that a dancer like embodies her art requires a whole lifetime of mistakes and forging and disciplining that body so that then she can actually tell us a story with it. And I'm like, how would AI do that? And so I do think sometimes tech, it's not Jacques Ellul, it's escaping me who the theorist is, but talks about any technology both extends certain human capacities and actually inhibits or atrophies certain. And so that's part of where I'm thinking through with imagination in particular. Where is it that these new innovative technologies are extending or amplifying some of it? But we need to be very aware that it's actually causing us to atrophy certain muscles. And we want to be really careful going, well, are some essential that we don't want to lose? And what are those?
Nick Cave, the Australian singer, songwriter, was asked, could AI write a really good Nick Cave song? And he said, it'll never be able to do it because it's never suffered.
Love Nick Cave. And he's right. I mean, the quote I have in mind from him was from the documentary he did after, I believe his son died by suicide, I think.
Well, he fell off a cliff. I think it was unclear.
Oh, it's unclear.
I think it was unclear.
Regardless, a child dies, right? That's the worst. And some line that he said was he and his wife chose, I think, as joy. Like we chose joy as essentially an act of defiance against reality. You know, that's a very human capacity driven by human suffering that you hold in your human body that AI knows nothing of. So one of my areas of expertise is cognitive science and cognitive psychology. And it was interesting in the cognitive revolution, all of a sudden people started trying to do computer technology to replicate human brains. So the model became the mind as a computer, which is a horrible metaphor, actually. And what's turned out is AI and the Sam Altmans of the world have been able to replicate some of the things that in the past we would have said are the distinct human things, rationality, reason, mathematics, these sort of things. But actually what it can't do are the base level things like emotion, empathy, suffering, these sort of things. And that's really interesting because one, it's reflecting on like the limitations of technology, but two, it's this really interesting opportunity for us to rethink how we've prioritized the values of being human. Maybe reason isn't the key pinnacle of what it means to be a human, but maybe actually empathy is. And that's where, whether it's music or something else, at least right now, I don't see how, even if, you gave me two tracks and I didn't know which one was, maybe I wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But I think it's important for us as a society to go, but there is a difference. And we want to invest in the things that allow actual Nick Cave to make us music versus some AI bot.
Can you talk about the way in which beauty and truth go together? Mm-hmm. Do beautiful stories carry something of the truth in them, and is truth beautiful?
Easy answer, yes, I think so. If you do the three transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty. A mentor of mine said if we looked at Western society in the last 100 years, let's say, there was a time when the leading of the transcendentals was truth. Like the important thing is let's get to the truth. What is the truth? Well, postmodernism came up and said, we have no idea. And then you get all these different sort of revolutions around the world and the US. And what emerged was then the leading priority was goodness, like ethics. Like we may not know what's true, but let's all stack hands on justice, on ethics, on what is good for society. And so this mentor of mine said, actually, in the last 30 years, let's say, what shifted is the doorway to both truth and goodness now is actually beauty. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter if you convince me of how reasoned your argument is about the truth. If it's ugly, it doesn't matter if it's true. It doesn't matter if it's good. If this is just not beautiful. So
it doesn't draw you in.
It doesn't draw you in because what is true has to be fundamentally beautiful. Now, I'll say that qualification. There's also the question of, well, what is beautiful? And there's a scholar, her book's called Bridge to Wonder, and it's how, like lowercase beauties, arts and things lead us to capital B beauty. Mm. I like her designation because she says the opposite of beauty is not ugliness or even like the grotesque or something. And she says the opposite of beauty is glamour. Now, what she describes glamour as is glamour is something that is very sort of solipsistic and inward turning and self-absorbed. It just always turns in on itself. So that's why she calls it glamour. So you could think of the worst of what we get in Hollywood or even like now the influencers out there. It's just completely an echo chamber of self-satisfaction. That's glamour for her. That's the opposite of beauty. She says what real beauty does, these small b beauties, is actually spin outward and point you always in some way back to capital B beauty. So it's not self-absorbed. It's something that pushes you out and up. And she said, and sometimes some of the most horrific and grotesque things can do that. And if you think of any of what we would call the truths of human life, so Nick Cave, right? Like that's another good example. This is a very ugly situation when a child dies, horrific. But his suffering, his mourning, his way of navigating that leads us to something that I would describe as beautiful, even though it's rooted in something horrific and dark. And so all of that is the truth of human life. And that's where I go, if it was glamorous, and that's, I think, one of the downsides that I've been looking at with, say, social media, that people who follow these influencers then get frustrated that they're not, standing up for certain issues, right? And you go, well, why would they ever do that? They're actually not concerned with truth or goodness. This isn't about beauty. This is about glamour. It's themselves. And I find that really interesting, that's a really good example of it looks beautiful, it looks pretty, it looks pristine, but it is the opposite of what we might call beautiful or ultimately true.
I want to talk to you about movies.
Great.
Topic you'd like to talk about.
I do.
So, a movie or television series that's grabbed you in the last 3 years.
Oh, I can only pick one?
No, go for it.
I really like Stranger Things for a number of reasons. Do you want me to expound upon that? Or?
Yeah, sure.
Well, first, I would say I'm more than anything else like an anthropologist. And usually, there's stuff that I like or don't like personally and am attracted to, but I'm often most fascinated with the things that capture the attention of a large group of people. Because I'm always going like, well, why? Why that thing and not something else? And there's a lot of like market dynamics and other things that go into it. But anytime I see something become prominent or popular, to me, I go, that says something about where we're at as a society, or at least this group of people are. And so that's one of the things that I find compelling about Stranger Things is like, well, what is it about that story that animated so much interest and enthusiasm? I mean, like just really hardcore Stranger Things fans out there. It's also like, it's fun. It's not the longest thing in the world, so you can like actually watch it. It's scary and sometimes grotesque, but it's not full on horror, so it's accessible. But I think at the core, it is, and I maybe identify with it because I was born in 79, to date myself. So I'm at the end of Gen X, but I'm a young Gen Xer, but I'm not a millennial. Like I'm in a weird space because I grew up really pre-technology, but then in like college and university and stuff, then technology became a thing. And in Stranger Things, I see a similar group of people where it's like, especially the early seasons, this is a group of kids that could go on their bikes out for hours and their parents have no idea where they're at, right? They're encountering some like really difficult things. And back to imagination, the whole thing starts with these kids are like playing Dungeons and Dragons, which is just a made up story game. Like it's literally a game where we imagine stories. So all of that's part of it, of going, remember that time when technology wasn't pervasive, where we weren't being surveilled, and that presented different conflicts and interests. At the same time, you look at that, and even though there's some like supernatural stuff and some like horror elements, the actual evil that goes throughout that whole series are the adults, the government, and the scientists and the technologists. They literally create the monsters that these kids are encountering and are an actual threat to their existence.
So this is the way you're saying is reflective of current either fears or anxieties or
exactly
concerns.
And going, so it feels like now I'm offering an interpretation of the film, and thus an interpretation of why I think people are attracted to it is because that resonates on some level. Even though this is a show set in the 80s, a group of people probably around my age and younger are going, that's a fictional story, but man, that feels like what it feels like now. It feels like no matter where we go or what we do, there is some larger group of people that have power that we don't have, that are making decisions that are not in our best interests. And we have no other choice but to band together and try to like overcome it, try to survive it, actually, is really what it is. And those kinds of stories, I think, really resonate. And it's part of why that's a series that I really like. And then I'm also fascinated with why other people like it.
Tell me about when you were really young and what drew you into movies and that mode of storytelling, and perhaps some impactful moments there.
Well, I grew up in a religious household. So
was this a no movies household?
It wasn't no any movies, but
particular kinds.
Yeah, particular kinds. And so it lent itself to like, there weren't a lot that were allowed. And classically, I was not allowed to watch He-Man because He-Man claimed to be the master of the universe.
No, so that conflicted with
there's only one master of the universe. And so anyway.
So did you rebel and then start watching movies?
Sort of. Actually, the more important one was Star Wars. My parents were not fan. And I actually have a vision in my memory of, I was somewhere. My father was the director of this sort of summer youth camp in Texas. And so I think there was like not the mess hall, but it was like sort of like a place where people would come together. And so there were a few different rooms off the main room. And I think there was like a TV with a VCR on it and some adult counselors, is that the right word here? The adults leading
supervisors,
supervisors, whatever. Yep. And they had popped in a VHS copy of Return of the Jedi. I remember walking past the room and going like, what is that? And it just completely captured my imagination. Like just from the start, I was all in on Star Wars. And again, similar to the Stranger Things, because it was like tapping into something that I wouldn't have been able to articulate, but seemed to be real in a sense. And that was, first off, this sort of the epic good versus evil. But more than that, the Force, I think, was always the thing. And so it began not a rebellion, but like a sort of subtle, slow creep of me trying to press my parents of like, here's what I'm going to watch, within the bounds. I'm sure I broke some rules at some point, but it got to where I was older. To my parents' credit, they weren't dogmatic about these sort of things. But I think the sort of restriction or prohibition probably made it more appealing. Yeah. So over time, I realized that for whatever reason, specifically movies at the beginning, just really sort of enthralled me, and then became ways that I was able to kind of understand the rest of my life. And not that, oh, now there really is a force that's, but going like, ooh, this helps me name outside of the movies my sense that there is some kind of like pervasive reality that I can't necessarily see. And a lot of people like a Han Solo are skeptical of it, but man, it sure seems to be guiding or moving, or that you can somehow connect with it. And so movies always gave me that kind of language for that.
And so there's sort of a link to your faith journey that's part of this story of yours. So you mentioned Stranger Things as reflective of the kind of era that we're in. Are there other films or series that you think are doing the same thing in different ways?
I'd say in the sort of recent past, one that actually you don't like, so maybe we should talk about it.
Yes, we should.
That I find really interesting, and I can tell you part of the reason why, is Wake Up Dead Man, the new Knives Out.
Yes, we had a conversation about this before we came in, and I saw it, and it wasn't my favorite.
Yeah, which is fine. I mean, this is
lots of people love it.
Well, and it's part of what I also like about movies, because in the U.S. right now, everyone disagrees about everything, but no one can actually talk about what they disagree on. And it's like, we're literally just,
we can definitely safely talk about Knives Out and still be friends at
exactly.
the end.
And so I find that really helpful when someone's like, no, I don't like it at all. Right? Let's talk about why. Okay. What's interesting about that is, and again, this is by a U.S. filmmaker, Ryan Johnson, a person that's not a person of any religious faith, setting it up as the characters are explicitly religious priests. These are priests in a community of religious folks. And at the very beginning, you have this young priest, this won't spoil anything, who is brought before some other priests for punching a fellow priest. And they're like, okay, we all don't like that guy, so that's all right. But you don't need to be fighting fellow priests. You need to be fighting society and culture, right? And he's like, well, no, I'm a boxer. I don't want to hold my hands up like a boxer. I feel like my job is to spread them out and embrace and empathetic concern.
I like that bit.
Yeah, and that's, to me, that does the whole thing. And I go, okay, what would cause a filmmaker, one, to write a story and make it about, it's a murder mystery, about religious people in particular? And then why would he frame it in those terms? And then even more shockingly, it doesn't end up being cynical about that character. Like, it very easily could have, in so many different ways. It was, oh, he's horrible, and he's, and he followed through in a way that I thought offered a really sympathetic take on that basic setup. And so I go, there's something there where it's almost like an appeal, like, hey, you religious folks, here's what we'd love to see from you, which is essentially to do what you say you're all about. Because what we see is the other character, the Jeff Bridges one. That's what it feels like you guys are doing a lot. And so to me, whether or not that captures the imagination, I don't know. But I do see in that an invitation from Hollywood to say, hey, we can do better. And what would that look like?
This is Life and Faith, and I'm speaking with Kutter Callaway about film, television, and our storytelling instincts. We'll get to comedy and horror shortly. But firstly, I wanted to ask Kutter about there being a kind of theological element to some of our best storytelling. In that, we are engaging with things like good and evil, justice and love, meaning and God. And that whether you are consciously religious or not, these themes are present in so much of what captures our imaginations. Here's Kutter again.
There's always a risk imposing something on a story.
Yeah.
And I have lots of friends that love to do that. And it's like, here's a Christ figure, or here's no, that's not
what that is.
I also appreciate things that don't seem to have any of those markings too. My sense is most stories, whether it's a film, a novel, whatever, the ones that I think are most compelling and most enduring, I think that's the thing, are saying something true about the human condition.
Yeah.
And sometimes the human condition, you don't experience redemption. I think those are as theologically rich as those that have a more sort of traditional, classic, let's say, Western Christian notion of things. That said, especially from Western filmmakers, I think that is an important thing, because those who aren't making stories from the West, there's a very different sensibility with that. But it makes sense, because whether you're religious or not, most of the philosophical architecture of the Western mindset is profoundly influenced by the Christian story in particular. And it's really hard for us to get out of that, regardless of what any sort of religious commitment is. My favorite story on that is J.K. Rowling. And she was interviewed after she released the 7th book of Harry Potter. And this very sincere interviewer was like, okay, so spoiler alert, but this has been long enough. Okay. She's like, so Harry has to die because he takes within himself the evil of this world and then comes back to life to overcome it. And Rowling's like, yeah. And the interviewer's like,
we heard this before.
I feel like that's sort of like the Jesus story. And she's like, well, yeah, the Jesus story is the best story. Of course, my story reflects that. So, here's a story that a lot of, in the US at the time, Christians were boycotting because it's about wizardry and witchcraft. And yet she's admitting openly, oh, the shape of this story is one where the central figure literally sacrifices his life to overcome evil. So those are the moments where I get excited, where especially when religious folks are condemning a thing and then it turns out it's actually their story.
Plenty of people have talked about the way recent literature has lacked some of this redemptive element. It's been a bit self-referential and almost wallowing in the terribleness of life. And it seems to me some of the most powerful stories do reflect what's terrible, and it's gritty and real, but somewhere or other you see some sort of grace or some sort of light. Is that something you relate to?
Oh, yeah. If anyone saw the very first season of True Detective, it is dark. It's very dark. I'm not even like, this isn't a recommendation. I mean, I do. It's a great show. But content warning if you go into that. It's very dark. And these two detectives deal with just some horrific stuff. And it's supposed to be. And then at the end, this isn't a spoiler, but it sort of is. I may get it slightly wrong, but essentially there's a lot of conversation about faith or spirituality or meaning or just nihilism. And Matthew McConaughey is essentially a nihilist through most of the whole thing, even outspokenly. Like they actually have conversations about philosophical nihilism. Okay. So you would think he, in pursuing this person that's doing all sorts of awful things, they come to the end and they're outside this hospital. I don't know why he's in a wheelchair, but he is. He's been wounded in the line of duty. And they're talking and they're looking up at the night sky. And Matthew McConaughey says something like, there's a lot of darkness, but you see all those like tiny little bits of light. They're hard to see sometimes, but I think the light's winning. That's kind of how the series ends. And you go, wait, what? Record scratch. Because you're thinking the whole time, this is just, it wasn't worth it. It's all darkness. It's all despair. And to me, that kind of story, then that scene alone, it pays off for the whole thing. It made the whole journey of darkness worth it, even for just the mere suggestion of, yeah, but I can see bits of light poking through. I'm with you. The others that just leave you wrecked, I'm like, I don't know if that was even good for me. Yeah. It's a little unsatisfying if there's just no hope. And if anything, aren't stories kind of supposed to give us hope?
Yeah. Have you seen the film Calvary?
I have, yeah.
I'm glad, because I want to ask you about that.
Okay, great.
This, to me, is an Irish film. I thought a depiction of, honestly, Christian love and sacrifice that was so powerful. It's a very gritty, pretty confronting story. Shocking, actually. But it felt real to me in ways that a lot of films trying to do the same thing do not.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Love that movie. I saw it at the Sundance Film Festival, and for a number of years, we take students there and do a class. And that screening in particular, Robert Redford had a little ski resort outside of Park City. So it's even more secluded, and it was snowing and picturesque. And we go in, the director's there. We talk to him, so anyway, I'm biased in that way. But
and just showing off now.
That's right, exactly. Well, no, I mean, this is why I walk away from those going like,
so good.
I think it was even beyond the film that made me love it. But I've watched it numerous times since, so I think it still holds up. So there's other Sundance films I'll feel that way coming out, and then I watch it again, I'm like, oh, no, it was the setting and the atmosphere. Yeah. Sure. But no, I think you're right. And I use it actually in a number of different settings now and have students watch it. And because of exactly what you're saying, and that is, it names in very raw ways the reality on the ground. This is Ireland post all the revelations of the just horrific things that representatives of the church did. Yeah. And a society that is just sick of it. And here comes this priest, a good priest, who embodies, represents for them. It's interesting. It's like the inverse of a mediator. he's actually mediating for them and representing all of that evil. And so the whole community just dumps on him over and over and over. And he endures it. I mean, the name of the film is Calvary. It's literally his walk to Calvary. It's essentially his Holy Week. And as you said, he accepts that as his call because he loves these people and has committed his life to these people, knowing exactly what's going to now. And again, I won't spoil it because I do want everyone to go watch it, even though it's maybe 10 years old. And he's committed to whatever it takes to be there. And even though at the end, it's back to kind of like True Detective, it's just a tiny, you have to like watch to see if there's a hint of a reconciliation, redemption. I believe there is. My interpretation is that there is. And it's very subtle. It's very small, but I think it's meaningful. Too easily nowadays, when you get religious representatives in films, they just become caricatures, really. And that one, I thought, demonstrated the real visceral thing on the ground and didn't turn him into some caricature. So I just think it's a really powerful movie all around.
Let's talk about horror.
Okay.
You're into horror films, unlike me, I have to say. You're into at least some of these. Now, I've got a friend who says that his journey towards Christian faith began by reading Stephen King novels and being confronted with what he said was the reality of evil. Why do you think that faith could be enriched by engaging with horror films?
A couple things. One, I actually was not into horror. I don't know if I would say I'm a fan. It's the anthropologist in me. And I'd heard, like your friend, numerous stories like that. I also ran into a number of people who identified as Christians who were filmmakers making horror films and would echo some similar sentiments. And then what was the final kicker? So I was like, okay, I directly know people who are making horror films. I know people who consume them and find them just really interesting and even compelling religiously. Then the final was after COVID in the US, basically the thing that saved theaters were horror films. Right. They started taking up a much larger percentage of box office sales. I think it's like 30% now. It's one of the largest genre categories of things that people go watch in cinemas. And so that's where I was like, back to my like, well, that's interesting. Like, why? And if I'm a student of culture and I supposedly speak on these sort of things, I'm like, I can't just ignore 30 to 35% of all movies that are made. So I kind of gave a dare to myself. All right, dive in. Just, this is a intellectual exercise. So I did. And I will say, coming out the other side, I have a much deeper appreciation for it, even though I still like have to be careful because sometimes I'm like, I don't want to do it.
That's my reluctance. I feel like I'll be having nightmares.
I can do it for you. So now you can read about my journey and you don't have to do it. And so that is part of why I did it. But a number of ways to answer your actual question. One is this notion of evil. So if we're talking about antiheroes and other stories that are really like vague in terms of like, what is good or bad here? I don't even know. Horror sets it up pretty clearly. There is an evil and that evil is bad. We don't like it. It's destructive. And the characters are either trying to overcome it, trying to escape it. They don't always succeed. Sometimes the evil wins, but it is pretty clear the bad guys or the bad people or whatever are bad. No question about it. Now, who exactly is the origin of that badness becomes an interesting conversation. So that's one. And actually some of the people that I know that are Christians making horror film, that's one of the things they latch onto and say that's why they like the genre. Other reasons are, it's not even just that there's evil, but in a whole subgenre of supernatural horror, there's a assumption that there is a supernatural realm. That's just part of the equation of horror. And so back to the sort of secularizing conversation we had before, it doesn't acknowledge any of that. It's like there are demons, there are spirits, there are ghosts, there's stuff, and you got to deal with it. And often the people dealing with it are people of religious conviction because those who don't have any sort of religious tools have no way to address supernatural evil. And so the people that end up being the heroes, the protagonists, and sometimes they're also the bad guys, but tend to be representatives of religion and even more narrowly, usually of Christianity of some kind. I think one of the greatest, if you want to say, evangelistic film, and actually was identified even at the time for Christianity, is The Exorcist. I mean, like, it is a brutal, brutal film to watch. Again, I don't know if I would recommend it, but it is the Christian story. It simply is a priest taking on the evil of a vulnerable child and giving his life to do so. Now, as a theologian, yeah, there's some theological problems. But as a story, I'll also say, and this is where maybe there's the third way to answer your question. So 1, evil is evil. 2, there's a lot of supernatural, but then there's a lot that isn't supernatural at all. And I found really interesting, this is where I put my psychologist hat on. More recently, there's a lot of horror that is coming from marginalized voices. So from women, from people of color in the United States, from Black actors and directors. And the horror, both in the content of the film and then the way that it engages you viscerally, is a way of dealing with real world horrors for those who have been brutalized by society. I find these really, really interesting for a lot of reasons. One, for any piece of art, I think, art traffics in empathy. So it gives you a way of like feeling the world in a way that you otherwise couldn't. And there are some horror films that do this. So for a person like me, for example, I don't walk around the streets in the United States worried that someone's going to attack me. But if I was a woman, if I was a Black or brown person,
you might.
I would have serious like different protocols and processes. You're thinking through things in just an entirely different way. I can walk into a horror film and feel what that's like in a way that I can't otherwise, which allows me to go, wow, that's pretty. Are you telling me you feel that way every day, just walking down the street? So it is this invitation to empathy. But then in addition, what I'm seeing, and this is actually even beyond horror, is these same filmmakers often, the evil, the monster, the whatever, isn't defeated or eliminated. It's treated with compassion. It's fascinating. There's a film called The Babadook. Do you know The Babadook?
No,
it's Australian, actually. Again, I won't spoil it, but basically there's this monster threatening, and what it is it represents the trauma that this woman has had. Yeah. And so given that trauma, it's haunting her and terrorizing her. And rather than defeat it, she essentially treats what is her trauma with compassion and learns to live with this monster that is in her basement, right?
Yeah.
And there's a few different examples of stories like that where like, oh, wow, I'm now nurturing this thing that could otherwise terrorize me. Now I'm sort of integrating into my life. And again, if you get a white male director, that's probably not what's going to happen. They're going to like overcome it, defeat it. They're going to be the priest that jumps out the window, the hero of the story. Now, not all horror films do that. There's some that are just nobody needs to watch.
Yeah.
And so there are bad examples. So please don't hear me to say all horror is great. But there are also really great horror films that invite a really different kind of interaction and reflection. And increasingly, those are available to us.
And finally, Kutter, and at the other end of the spectrum from horror, let's talk about comedy and humor. It's something very human. What is it about comedy that is so human and so, and in its sense, redemptive, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've always been interested in comedy. I like to laugh. But when I was researching and doing all the stuff on horror, comedy kept coming up, which I was like, wait, what? And so to your question about being human, kind of one of the realizations, I was like, oh, well, being afraid and laughing are two of like the most uncontrollable responses. If you find something funny, you laugh without trying to. It's a reflex. And you jump at a fright as a reflex. And so artistically, structurally, how to get a jump scare and a laugh, there's a lot of overlap there. And so I actually kind of started more exploring comedy because of its inverse in fear. And then the podcast that I did for the horror stuff, I was going to scary places. So each episode I go to a scary place and, to put the listener in that space. And I thought, oh, well, if we did a comedy thing and we're talking about its response to fear, well, I guess I should do a scary thing. And so that's when I started doing actual stand-up comedy. So I would go, it's because I wanted the audio, like you need to feel the terror of just nobody laughing, just the silence.
Yeah, that is horror.
Yes. And most people, right, the top 10 fears still, fears 2 through 10 all have to do with dying. It's like going on a plane, getting car or whatever, or just straight up dying. Number 1 is still public speaking. And so Seinfeld's great quote is that means you'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. And when I tell people I've been trying stand-up comedy, now again, I'm not any good, but they will say, oh, that is my nightmare. But everyone loves a great stand-up comic. And it's really interesting. The literature, the philosophical literature, everyone says we all laugh. We all are attracted to comedy. But it's very divided onto what's its value, why do we do it, where did it emerge from, and how do we understand it? I mean, all the way back to Plato. I mean, Plato was not a fan because he thought comedy had to be based on basically cruelty. So it was, you're always punching down. You always have like and there's an element of comedy that is there. Others say, no, it's a virtue. We do it together in groups. So there's a bonding mechanism. There's a lot, depending upon what society you're in, there's self-deprecation that actually is very effective. And that is a marker of humility and whatnot. But on the whole, I'm seeing it as essentially, whether it's a film or you go to a stand-up comedic show or something else like that, the main themes are, we are creatures who have sort of affective contagion. So when we're together, there is something actually psychological, pro-social about laughing together. There's a bonding thing. There's a danger in that because if you have a marked person who we're all laughing at, it actually does strengthen those bonds, but in a really negative way.
Yeah.
If the person making the comedy is you joining in, it's a little more life-giving. But there is that bonding thing that we value being together in a room. And post-COVID especially, I think people are hungry for that. And same thing with horror. Like, we want to get in a room and be scared together. That experience is important. It's not just me by myself. If you've ever been on an airplane and watched either a horror or a comedy and you're laughing out loud and no one else is, and you feel just really weird, that's why. But the other is, comedy is often what I would call prophetic. It can speak truth to power in ways that other forms can't. Yeah. Parody and satire are really pretty effective because I'm convinced that the authoritarians in our midst are utterly humorless. That's one of the things that is problematic. Yeah. And so some of our only tools as citizens is parody, is satire. As an American citizen right now. And
you're feeling that.
Yeah. If any American is listening and you disagree with me, I'm sorry, but you can send emails to you guys.
That's right. We'll cop that.
But I've tried a few little proof of concept things to do some like parody with respect to not just our current government, but also religious people who support it.
Yeah.
And I realized at a certain point, right now, the challenge is it is its own parody.
Yeah.
I'm like, I can't make it more extreme than it already is. It's laughable. And that I find in terms of comedy now is a sort of diagnostic tool. I'm looking at it going like, oh, that is one of the red flags of any of the way that we come together as public citizens is to go, if your governmental structures are their own self-parody, that's a problem.
That's a problem, yeah.
If you can't actually make fun of it, and also they're tamping down comedians first in the United States, and foremost.
Late night television programs.
Exactly. So there's a power that they even recognize. And so we're in the US, we're in a really weird state. And then after that, I think then it's, what's great about laughing is we know this is absurd. And it's nice to sometimes just go and laugh with people because the rest of reality is just crazy. Grim. And so laughing is some sort of like a cathartic thing that really is helpful when it's like, I don't feel like I can do much else as a citizen. So that's been helpful for me. Maybe it's too revealing, but maybe that's why I'm pursuing it right now, because I'm going, I can't do anything else, but maybe I can help people laugh.
This has been Life and Faith with me, Simon Smart. Thanks to my guest today from California, Dr. Kutter Callaway. His next book is Be Afraid: What Horror Reveals About Facing the Darkness. That's out in coming months. You can check out his other work at his website, and I'll put the details in the show notes. Thanks to Russ Matthews at Real Dialogue, that's REEL. You can check out what Russ does in facilitating conversations about film and faith, and read film reviews and discussions at realdialogue.com. And thanks to our producer, Alan Douthwaite, a discerning film and television critic himself. His recommendations are nearly always good. Thanks for your company. Next time on Life and Faith.
The biggest mistake that we have made with powerful artificial intelligence is giving it a human personality. I don't think we're talking enough about this yet, but I really think that we are going to look back in the 2020s and ask ourselves, why on earth did we allow these AIs to simulate human personalities?